Marhaba, Shalom and welcome to the exciting podcast Israel and Palestine Unpacked that is dedicated to exploring the complexities of the ongoing political situation between Palestinians and Israelis. Throughout this podcast, we will explore unresolved issues, the human cost and the diverse experiences and perspectives of those directly affected. These discussions demand sensitivity as the emotional weight of the topic cannot be overlooked. So far, we have focused primarily on the personal stories of individuals, their experiences, struggles and views, which provide valuable insights into how lived experiences shape perceptions. Moving forward, in the near future, I aim to engage with academics, historians, journalists and writers who have examined different dimensions of this complex political landscape. Additionally, we will highlight the significant contributions of peace organizations, both locally and globally, whose work fosters understanding and offers paths towards reconciliation. This podcast approaches the subject from an academic perspective, striving to unpack and better understand the issues at hand. I am not a journalist by trade, and my interviewing skills are continually developing. With each conversation, I aim to grow through self-awareness and constructive feedback. While I may occasionally miss opportunities to further explore claims or subjects, I view these moments as steps in a learning journey that I hope will make each episode more insightful. Finally, it is important to emphasize that all views expressed are those of the interviewees alone, and do not necessarily reflect the views of this podcast. On today's episode of Israel and Palestine Unpacked, we speak with Professor Mohammed Dajani Daoudi, a Jerusalemite scholar and peace activist whose work has challenged entrenched narratives on both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian divide. He holds doctorates from the University of South Carolina and the University of Texas at Austin, and is a prolific author, having written numerous books and academic articles. At a time when Islam is often misrepresented as being synonymous with extremism, Professor Dajani advocates for an interpretation of Islam that remains true to its Quranic foundations, one that champions freedom of religion, tolerance, reconciliation, coexistence, cooperation, compassion, empathy, and interfaith dialogue. We hope that this episode is both informative and deeply moving. If you enjoy conversations like this, subscribe to stay updated as we continue exploring personal narratives within this complex and deeply human conflict. Beyond his academic work, Professor Dajani has been a vocal advocate for Holocaust education in Palestinian society. In 2007, he founded the Wasatiyya Moderate Islamic Movement and the Wasatiyya Academic Institute. In 2012, he co-authored Holocaust, Human Agony to help educate Palestinians about the Holocaust. His advocacy has not come without cost. In March 2014, he was forced to resign from his positions as Rector of Libraries and founding Director of the American Studies Institute at Al-Quds University, after leading Palestinian students on an educational visit to Auschwitz. The trip aimed at fostering empathy, compassion and tolerance, provoked backlash, including death threats and the torching of his car. Despite these challenges, Professor Dajani's commitment to peace and dialogue has been widely recognized. In 2014, Tufts University honored him with the Dr. Jean Meyer Global Citizenship Award for his efforts to combat extremism. From 2015 to 2017, he served as a Weston Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. More recently, in March 2023, the Austrian Parliament awarded him the Simon Wiesenthal Prize for his work against anti-Semitism. And later that year in September, he received the Excellence in Leadership Award from Queen's College, City University of New York. In this interview, we discuss his visit to Auschwitz with Palestinian students, the challenges of dialogue within Palestinian society, the role of political Islam in shaping Palestinian identity today, and the founding of Al-Wasatiyya as an advocate for education and a tool for peace. Before diving into these crucial issues, we begin with Professor Dajani's personal journey, what shaped his worldview, and how he came to challenge dominant narratives.
I was born in Jerusalem in 1946. My family, the Dajani family, is a very well-known family, Palestinian family. My great-grandfather was appointed to be the custodian of the King David tomb in Mount Zion by the Ottoman Sultan Sulaiman the Magnificent back in 1525. And I grew up in Jerusalem, and then I studied at the Friends School, which is a Quaker school. And then I also studied at the American University of Beirut. And in Lebanon, I was radicalized, and I joined, after 1967 June War, I joined Fatah, the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, between 1967 and 1975. And then I left Fatah in 1975 and went to England to study. And then from England, I left to the United States, where I got an MA in 1976 from Eastern Michigan University in Ypsilanti. And then I got my first PhD from the University of South Carolina in Columbia in 1981. And in 1983, I got another PhD from University of Texas at Austin. And then I came back to Jordan, where I taught. I started the Political Science and Diplomacy Department at Applied Science University, and I was the chair for between 1990 to 1995. In 1995, I was appointed Chief Technical Advisor to help the Palestinian Authority in establishing the ministries and to establish the civil society that was the product of the Oslo Accords. And for 2 years that I opened 3 training centers, in which one in Jerusalem, one in the West Bank, and one in Gaza, were under the UNDP, where we trained Palestinian civil servants. And then I became consultant to the Ministry of the PA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then I was the Director of Technical Assistance and Training for PECDAR, for the Palestinian Authority. And in 2002, I joined the Al-Quds University, where I established the American Studies Graduate School. And I also became the Director of Libraries at the university. And in 2014, March 2014, I took students to Auschwitz to teach them about the Holocaust. And then it was a very controversial issue, and I was pressured to leave my post at the university. And then my car was torched and I was threatened. So my friend, Dr. Robert Satloff, who was the director of the Washington Institute for Near East Study and for Near East Policy in Washington, invited me to be Western Fellow at the Washington Institute, and for 2 years I was there. And then after that I came back to Jerusalem to continue my work on Wasatiyya and moderation.
Okay. Just picking up on a point that you made, some of the information you shared about in 2014 you led a group of Palestinian students to visit Auschwitz in Poland. and as you stated, an initiative that sparked intense backlash. Looking back, what did that moment teach you about the limits and possibilities of dialogue in Palestinian society? What does it take to challenge entrenched narratives in such a deeply polarized conflict?
I was invited to go to Auschwitz back in 2011, and as a leader, a religious leader of Wasatiyya, and it was by a French organization called Al-Din, and they had invited more than 150 leaders from the religious leaders from different parts of the world, and I went with another Palestinian who was the Deputy Minister of Religious Affairs. And it was my first visit to Auschwitz and my first uh, lesson about what happened during the Holocaust and the Second World War. And to me, I came from a culture that denies the Holocaust, or at least considers it a Zionist propaganda, and it is not part of the Palestinian narrative. And the Palestinian collective narrative ignores anything related to the Nakba because many Palestinians feel that the Holocaust was the cause of their 1948 Nakba, that that Western countries uh, allied and helped Israel uh, to be formed at the time, to be established at the time, and because of sympathy for what happened in the Holocaust. So Palestinians have a negative attitude towards this concept, this idea, this tragedy, and then and so for them, for a teacher to take his students to teach them about the Holocaust, which is in clash with the collective narrative, is something it was not acceptable for them, and there was at the same time we I understand that there was a lot of incitement uh, for for different reasons against me personally and against the trip itself, but mainly against me as establishing the Wasatiyya and calling for moderation and calling for peace and calling for dialogue and calling for end of conflict. So the extremists within the Palestinian society took that took that as a pretext in order to attack me personally, called me traitor and called me normalizer. Some called me king of normalization. And my response was that this is knowledge, and I wanted the Quran uh, instructs me, and it says, and God advance us in knowledge. So this is for the students to find knowledge. And this is what I told the students when we went. I said, we are going there, and it's up to you to learn. If you go in with an open mind, you might learn. But if you go in with a closed mind, carrying the package of what you heard, what you were taught, then you might not learn much. And so that that was the main approach that I took at the time with the students, and then even with the society, because my response to the backlash that did take place was, I'm an educator, and this is part of education. It's not a political move that I took the students. It's not to contradict the Palestinian narrative, but it is to promote education within society and knowledge and to seek the truth, because and we cannot keep in the darkness, particularly if we are seeking peace with the other. And, and thus, the idea was that what will happen if the students will study about the suffering of the other? To what extent will that knowledge about the suffering of the other will help in reconciliation or in bridging the gap between both people? If the Israelis study about the suffering of the Palestinians in 1948 and the Palestinians learn about the suffering of the Jews during the Holocaust. So the concept there is that I believe that it will bring them closer together rather than put them apart. And I think that the experience that we have had with the students going had proved that this is correct, that this is right, that it would make people see the other as human beings, as not in terms of the violence, in terms of the racism, the prejudice, the hatred, the enmity, but rather in terms of the humanity of the other and the pain of the other, so that the other will understand your pain also. And in this way, people will seek peace rather than seek a war. And when people talk about Palestine or Israel from river to sea, it doesn't mean to throw the other in the sea or in the desert, but rather for them, to both of them, to have a shared uh, statehood within the country, either one state within river from river to sea, or two states from river to sea. I support the idea of the two-state solution because I believe that it is very difficult for people under this having been in conflict for so many years, more than 10 decades, for them to have in 1 year to shift to a one-state solution, because you need to build trust first. And I think having the two states together, cooperating together, living next to each other in peace, then this will help in trust building. And eventually, if they want to remain two states, that's their option of the people. If they want to have a confederacy between the two states, that's also another option. Or if they want to eventually, after some time, want to develop it into one state, also that's one option. But I'm for the two states at the moment, and hopefully that this will bring the people together. What happened on October 7th aimed at widening the gap between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and to end the Arab normalization process. At the same time, the escalation of violence in the post-October 7, also by the extremists on the other side, meant to end any idea of peace between both people. Both of them live in the fantasy they can establish a one state, whether it is an Islamic state from river to sea or a Jewish state from river to sea. And I think both of them are mistaken, are wrong. And the only option is that to have two states there. For Palestine, I wish to see not an Islamic state, but rather a secular state where Muslims, Christians, and Jews can live in that state under a democratic system. At the same time, to recognize the other state, which, if desired to be a Jewish state, then that's the choice of the Israeli people to whether to have it a democratic state or to have it a religious state, being a Jewish state. So it is up to them to decide what type of system they would like to have.
So, given your research and experience, um, we look back on events such as the Holocaust, the Nakba, we think of October the 7th, as well as subsequent war that has resulted after that. It seems that people in the extremes, whether they be in Israeli society or Palestinian society, and within Palestinian society, notably Hamas, are in the ascendancy, and their ideas, along with that of right-wing settlers, to have a one state that's dominated by one party or the other. So the fact on the Hamas side that they believe very much in this idea, correct me if I'm wrong, that Palestine or historic Palestine is an Islamic waqf and it is land that has been given by God and therefore must be under an Islamic state. And then you have the religious Jews and Jewish nationalists on the right promoting a greater Israel narrative. Focusing on Palestinian society, though, how do you see the role of political Islam in shaping Palestinian identity today? Has the rise of groups such as Hamas changed how Palestinians and I suppose the international community view the interplay between religion and politics in the conflict?
You see, I believe that religion is so far has been part of the problem, and religion should be part of the solution. Now, what people miss is that Hamas as an entity, whether it is a political entity or a religious entity, is not part of the Palestinian national uh, politics in the sense that, politically speaking, Hamas is against the Oslo peace process and against any kind of peace with Israel related to uh, any political format. So politically, Hamas is not part of the national aspiration for peace, which has crystallized by the Oslo 1993 Oslo Accords to use the diplomacy. Now, Hamas opted to continue with the armed struggle and in this way put itself outside the Palestinian political, national political aspiration or national political uh, uh, camp. Okay, religiously speaking, also Hamas is outside the Islamic religious camp in the sense that the Muslim Brotherhoods do not believe in the Abrahamic uh, way of thinking in terms of that God has sent prophets throughout the throughout history in order to send his message among them, yani Abraham, among them Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and many others. And so, in this way, within the Wasatiyya concept, we believe that Islam came to complement other religions, Christianity and Judaism, while Hamas teaches Islam came to replace other religions, Christianity and Judaism. So they try to use the Quran in a way that is anti-other, anti-Christian, anti-Jewish, and they misinterpret the verses within the Quran to along those lines. And to give you an example, Al-Fatiha Surah says the Al-Fatiha is the first chapter of the Quran. It's made of 7 verses. The last three verses says, guide us to the right path, the path of those uh, whom you have blessed, not those who incurred your anger or are lost. Now, Hamas, along with the Muslim Brotherhood, interpret this to mean that the Jews incurred God's anger, the Muslims are the blessed, and the Christians are the lost in between, which is not the interpretation from the Quran. The Quranic interpretation for it is that the blessed are the believers, the pious, the faithful, whether Muslim, Christian, or Jews. Those who incurred God's anger are those who deny God's presence, and those who are lost are the hypocrites in between, who claim they are believers and in reality they are not believers. So, and this is just one example. And for instance, also, and the Quran says, religion to God. There is a verse that says, religion to God is Islam. Ad-Din and Allah al-Islam. So, the Hamas interpretation is that Islam means the Islamic faith. The Wasatiyya interpretation is that Islam means to believe in God and to worship God and to submit yourself to God. And to support this interpretation, it finds that there are other verses in the Quran that says Abraham was not a Jew or Christian, but was a Muslim, long time before the message of Islam. Also that Moses talks to his people and his people say, we are Muslimun, long time before Islam. Jesus talks to his disciple in the Quran. It says that Jesus talked to his disciple and his disciple said, we are Muslimun, we are Muslims, long time before the message of Islam. And so this means the interpretation when the Quran says religion to God is Islam, not the Islamic faith in the sense of excluding the two other, but rather in including the three religions and believing in God, in worshipping God, in believing in submission oneself to God. So basically that's the difference between the Wasatiyya teaching and the Hamas teaching. And this is where we are telling people you don't need to fight Hamas. And Hamas, and you don't need to exterminate Hamas by violence as Netanyahu and the others are calling for, because basically you will not achieve any goal by doing that. What you need to do is talk about the ideology of Hamas, which is an extremist ideology, and try to talk about and to clash it with the moderate ideology of Islam, of the Quran. And so to teach the people to de-radicalize the rhetoric and to de-radicalize the interpretation of the Quran and the Hadith, and try to make the people actually guide them into the right path of Islam. And in this way, you don't have to fight Hamas, you don't have to fight any of the radicals, but rather you promote the moderate concept of Islam, which is what Islam teaches, and going back to the Islamic scriptures. And in this way, you can be able to bring back the people to the fold and teach them, rather than hate the other, love the other. Rather than have enmity with the other or kill the other, rather help the other, heal the other, and build bridges rather than build walls. And in this way, you will be a true faith, a true believer in Islam, in Christianity, and in Judaism. Because if you plant hatred, you reap hatred. But if you plant seeds of peace, seeds of love, you reap love, you reap tolerance, you reap understanding, you reap hope. And this is where that's what our message is to our people.
You founded the Wasatiyya movement to promote moderation, reconciliation, and dialogue. Can you share what led you to this path?
Yeah. It was a Friday morning, and it was Ramadan, and my house is near the checkpoint. So I was in my office overlooking the Israeli checkpoint between the West Bank and Jerusalem, separating the West Bank from Jerusalem. And on that Friday morning, there were hundreds of Palestinians trying to cross the checkpoint in order to go to Jerusalem to pray because it was Ramadan and it was blessed to them that they will pray the first Friday of Ramadan at the Al-Aqsa Mosque at the Haram Sharif. Israelis were preventing them from crossing the checkpoint because they did not have permits. And they were trying to push them back. And I was observing what was happening from my balcony and thinking that eventually the Israelis will shoot at them and it will be a media event. However, what happened is that the officer at the checkpoint uh, made a deal with the people. He brought buses and then they allowed the people to cross. They searched them, they got their IDs, and then the buses took them to Jerusalem to pray. And then after prayer, the buses brought them back to the checkpoint where they got their IDs and they went home. So to me, it was an opening, more an inspiring moment because I thought those are moderates, they are religious, but yet they're not extremists, and they did not. They wanted to pray, and the soldiers were worried about security. So both of them got what they wanted. It was a win-win situation where the people went and prayed and came back and went home, and the soldiers and the officer. Uh, it was a peaceful event. There was no security problems, and everybody went. And every Friday, that happened on that checkpoint. So, in my mind, it was an inspiring moment because I thought those are those Palestinians are moderate, but who represents them? And so, because in Palestine there are 10 to 15 religious Islamic parties, and they are all anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, anti-negotiations, anti-diplomacy, and they believe in the liberation from river to sea to establish an Islamic state. And and so, and I thought, and this who represents these people who just crossed that checkpoint peacefully to go to pray and came back peacefully to go home. And so that's that's how I started that's how the idea came to me, and I thought that I will be using a verse from the Quran, which is it is the second chapter of the Quran is Al-Baqarah Surah, the cow surah, cow chapter, and it is composed of 286 verses. And verse 142 says, God will guide you to the right path. And then verse 143 says, and thus we have created you ummatan wasata, a middle ground nation, a temperate nation, a balanced nation. So I thought to take that verse from the Quran and try to promote the concept and culture of moderation. And so that's where I was inspired by that idea. And so on January 1st, 2007, I published a booklet in Arabic called Al-Wasatiyya. We started doing conferences on moderation, on Wasatiyya, and inviting religious leaders and political leaders to come and speak. We went on that for 10 years, every year on March 22nd, 21st, to hold a conference where people will come and talk about wasatiyya and moderation in order to spread the concept of moderation within the Palestinian society. Now, the idea of this, that this will be a model in the sense that we can, in promoting moderation, we open the door for reconciliation. And then opening the door for reconciliation, we pave the way for peace and conflict resolution and negotiations and eventually living coexistence. That's basically, in a nutshell, the concept of wasatiyya. And what we are doing? We are trying to promote an interfaith dialogue between the Muslims and Jews and Christians, and at the same time, we are trying to promote middle ground, so that in the beginning, the idea was to focus on Islam, and then we moved on that also in Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism and all religion, they call for moderation. And so we moved from an Islamic culture to a religious general culture. At the same time, a philosophical culture, because also philosophers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, others, Maimonides from Jewish culture, Al-Ghazali from Islamic culture, and many from the Christian culture that promote moderation. So that's basically the idea that we have. And we have published more than 50 journals that we distribute for free in different languages. We hold workshops, we convene conferences, and we try to promote that concept, particularly among the youth, in order so that the youth do not grow up with the concept of martyrdom or death, but rather with knowledge and life. And so that's where we we contradict the others who use religion in order to promote violence, enmity, and intolerance, racism. We try to promote love, cooperation, tolerance, empathy, and forgiveness in order to promote a future for our kids that is full with life rather than with enmity and hatred and violence.
Indeed. From what I understand about you and your movement, Al Wasatiyya, you've long advocated for education as a tool for peace in a climate where dialogue often seems impossible. What practical steps do you believe can still be taken to foster this reconciliation? And just to finish with a few practical examples of specific grassroots initiatives or policy changes that give you hope for the future, in your opinion.
I look back at what happened in the aftermath of the Second World War, and before the end of the war, Nazism was and fascism was very popular among the people, whether in Italy or in Germany. And after the war, the Allied forces went through a denazification process where people were educated in liberal ideologies. And I believe the same thing could happen with us, that in the post-war era, and in the aftermath of the war, we should have de-radicalization process for the people that will include not only education, but also within the civil society, empowering any moderate voices within the civil society. And this way, empowering the multipliers. That's why I supported and I am one of the founding members of a school in Germany at the Europa University in Flensburg, where it is a PhD program for it's a program. The school is called the European Wasatiyya School for Conflict Resolution and Peace. And so the idea in that of that school is to bring in people from conflict areas and teach them reconciliation, teach them empathy, teach them how to build peace, how to conflict resolution. Because what we need is to have education, to have people, teachers, getting educated in the process of peace, in peace education and Wasatiyya education. And it's not enough to change the textbooks and to change texts and stories in the textbooks, delete things and put in things, but rather you want to change the mindset of people. And to change the mindset of people, you have to start with education. And people may say that this may take long time, whether it takes long time or short time, but it needs to be done. And now there is this school in Flensburg. There should be similar school in different universities, whether in Palestine or in the Arab world. And part of the Palestinian education is that it is what they call national education. And in this national education, it is anti-other education. And what we want is to have a peace education, a Wasatiyya education. And in this Wasatiyya education, then you are building bridges with the other. And this is what the people and the Palestinian Authority do not understand. That they think that this is for negotiations. No, this is not for negotiations. This is good for your society. You do it not to please the Israelis or the Americans or the Europeans. You do it because it's the right thing to do. And you want to raise your children, your next generation, you want to raise them on loving the other, on loving each other, on believing in peace. And so in this way, what you will be doing by promoting Wasatiyya education in the school, at the university, this is something. I sent a letter to the President Abbas asking him if he would approve establishing a Wasatiyya Center PhD program at Al-Istiqlal University, which is one of the Palestinian universities. In order for that university in particular, which is focusing on civil servants and militant people, military people, for them to learn also, in addition to learning about war, to learn about peace. But unfortunately, there was no response to that. But I believe that every single Palestinian university should have a center, a Wasatiyya center within the university, so that more people will learn about moderation, will study it as science. Because look what happened before, when after Oslo in the beginning, there were a lot of people talking about peace, and there were NGOs and all that. And then suddenly, when the Al-Aqsa Intifada in 2000 started, all these schools of NGOs of peace disappeared. And nobody was talking about peace On the contrary, if you say peace, you are a collaborator. So this is where you have to respond to these attacks. When they attack me saying you are a normalizer and you are king of normalization, I said to them, well, normalization to end occupation and establish a two-state solution is good, shouldn't it be? And to have peace. But normalization to empower the occupation and to beautify the occupation, this is treason, I agree with you. And this is not what we are doing in normalization. And trying to promote normalization, even within the Arab states with the Abrahamic Accords, I think that we shouldn't have attacked and criticized the Abrahamic Accord. On the contrary, it is part of the peace process, and we should have used the Abrahamic Accord as Palestinians in order to pressure the Israelis to seek peace. And so, in this way, to move on, we have to be more creative in our ideas. We have to leave the past and the present behind and focus on the future and think in terms of the future. But if we can keep the past, you killed me, I killed you, you committed this terror act, and you committed this massacre, and if we keep blaming each other and keep bringing the past in order to block the future, we will not reach anywhere. But the only way to move forward is to leave the baggage of the past behind, to leave the baggage of the present behind, and to walk free forward, and to think forward, and to take our children away from the past and the present enmity and hatred and prejudice and all that, to a different future, to a more peaceful future where we can teach them to live together. And our children, you can easily learn that. If you go in Jerusalem, you walk into parks, you will tend to find the Palestinian families as well as the Israeli families have their children play in the park, and they may play together without any problem. And so that's part of the culture that we want to have them see each other as human beings, not as enemies, not as terrorists or as occupiers, but rather as human beings. You go to the Israeli hospitals and you will find there are Palestinian doctors, there are Palestinian patients there being treated, and there is no distinction that you are a Palestinian, we don't want to treat you, or you wait forever or whatever. No, and it is all, people are being treated as human beings. And this is what we want. This is the culture that we want to raise, we want to have.
Perfect.
And education helps in that. Education helps us in that. At the same time also, building bridges between both and to have efforts to de-radicalize. Millions of dollars have been spent to build walls, but and billions of dollars has been spent in this Gaza war. Billions of dollars has been spent and lost, not to mention human lives. And so if this amount of money would have been put in order to build peace and to build bridges between both people, then we would have had a totally different output from what we see today.
Yeah.
Instead of all this destruction and killing and hate and enmity.
As we wrap up today's episode, I want to express my deepest gratitude to our guest, Professor Mohammed Dajani Daoudi, for their openness and willingness to share their personal views, experiences, and rich stories. Looking ahead to our next episode, we'll be speaking with Dr. Eleni Fotu, a forensic psychologist from the Institute for the Prevention and Treatment of Violence and the Promotion of Gender Equality, who will speak about radicalization and de-radicalization. Thank you for tuning in today. Your engagement means the world to me. If you have thoughts, feedback, or questions, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out via email at israel-palestine-unpacked@gmail.com or connect with us through our Facebook page. All the contact details are included in the description below. Finally, don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss future episodes. I hope you'll join me next time on Israel and Palestine Unpacked.